Hello there, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for sitting in. It will be, of course, a very subjective talk. So I'm trying to read a bit of what has been gospeled and evangelized before, and trying to encourage you to really stick to your thing and not feeling too bad about not chasing the latest mega trends, because it is easy to really get torn down that you're still not doing VR, although it's so fantastic. And I don't think that actually you should be doing that. So I've entitled it The Necessity of Resisting Those Fashionable Hypes, because although they're fantastically looking like this little mermaid siren here, they may actually really tear you down and be not so well beneficial in the end. In 4 little chapters, I'm going to talk about what I think the market of digital games is looking like at this moment, and about what these megatrends have been, and then on the other hand, what the growth potential, in my opinion, really is, and which measures, for example, we at Gameforge are taking to do that. As was just mentioned, I stepped down as CEO of Gameforge about 2 months ago. We are employing 450 people, doing an annual revenue of about $100 million. We're around for a dozen of years now. I was with them for 10 of that. And we are developing web games originally, going, of course, into self-publishing, free-to-play business model, taking on many years ago MMOs, publishing in Europe, the likes of Ion, Terra, and many other titles, having had the biggest one in Europe for many, many years, which was Metin 2. Who knows Metin 2, the MMORPG? I'm not surprised, not many, although it was played in Europe by about 9 million active monthly players, which is pretty much triple of World of Warcraft had back then, so that's not bad. Of course, unfortunately, it was in the wrong business model, in the business model of free-to-play, so we didn't make $1 billion out of it. Yet we make some nice monies, and are happy to be in front of you here today. So let's start. The current state of the market, it's more the Western market, of course, not so much the Eastern one. Let's talk about that. I actually think this is the 3 bubbles I want to talk about, what describe the marketplace. It does not hold for all sub-segments in general, but still I believe it does hold for an entity of what I would describe as digital games. So if you compare the growth in other territories, like here in China, 23%, and you compare that to Europe, 5% growth, or North America, 3%, as in the US. You can also see Latin America. So our friend Peter Vorman providing data for the industry, both together with PricewaterhouseCoopers, they actually think that digital games in North America and EMEA are the slowest growing markets. So I also think that the market is consolidating and that there's many players which were there as publishers or developers. They ceased to exist. They either have been successfully bought out or they just stopped and went out of business. So at Gameforge we may as well be considered, as it comes to free-to-play for sure games, to have started a trend when for about $100 million we acquired a company called Frogster 5.5 years ago, which was a listed company, so it was quite a thing. And then every single year afterwards there were mergers taking place, or people who are putting in money before a company would otherwise go out of business. So it is consolidating, which is always, of course, a sign of that we are entering into a later stage of the marketplace. Now, we have seen the 2015 numbers, how the revenue developed. Let's look into the future, whether that might be any much brighter. I mean, growing by 3%, for example, of course, is fantastic for many other industries. But for us in the games industry, and comparing that to other regions in the world, that's, of course, significantly less. Now, how does it is expected to continue for the next 2-3 years? Well, it's a mere 1 or 2% plus in our Western markets, and I'll leave it to speak for itself. Now let's look into the two different possibilities of a game being offered, both in a pay-to-play mode or in a free-to-play mode. So on pay-to-play, we are seeing MMOs, of course, overall in the world going down, but a bit more in Europe than in worldwide, where we have in Europe -7% and worldwide we have -6%. So as it comes to the free-to-play environment, we see a picture that we have growth expected in the next 2 years of +5% in North America, likewise in Western Europe. Again, it's Peter Warman's Newzoo numbers, whereas in Asia Pacific, from a bigger basis, we still see a growth of +13%. Now, you can look more into it at different costs per acquisition, how much you need to spend for those guys, but I don't want to dig into that in our little 20 minutes we have together here. So overall, I would say achieving growth is actually becoming increasingly difficult for games companies in the Western Hemisphere. That's what I would describe in a nutshell the current state of the industry to be. Let's move on to the second part and talk about the fantastic megatrends that have been promising growth to all of us. So I want to talk about the three things of mobile, going on to Steam with a PC game, and virtual reality. So mobile, I always want to compare the promise that is out there and how actually the reality has currently been looking to all of us. You know it all, the promise. Let's hear a picture from the White House. Everybody now takes pictures, everybody has it right at its fingertips. So there's nearly 5 billion mobile users worldwide which have access to games-enabled devices. So it's everywhere for the user, it's everywhere and simple for us as a publisher as well. It's as simple as a touch on the button to actually upload it on an app store. There's a huge market, estimated above $30 billion of annual revenue on mobile apps. Actually, that's continued to grow very highly to 50% plus of it, 45 billion in as little as 2 years. We have the tablet coming into play, a platform which didn't exist a few years ago and now is expected to grow within only 5 years to quadruple from lower than 4 billion to up to 13 billion US dollar. Whatever, nobody will feel that these will be the exact numbers in the future, but in any case, it's expected to be there with a significant revenue. Also, people are spending more on their mobile gaming habit as related to otherwise their gaming habit. So whereas at the moment they're spending 3 out of 10 US dollars on average of their gaming pleasure on the mobile world, they're expected in a few years to do 40% of it. Doesn't seem much, but it's quite significant, a percentile increase in the spending probabilities. All of that is jolly good and fantastic, isn't it? Let's look at reality, however, and you know that as well. It's very difficult to get seen, so everybody knows there's a 5-digit amount of games being added to app stores every single month, so that totals at about 1.5 million gaming apps on each of the big 2 platforms. So also likewise, the guys being your peers in publishing, they number near 500,000 active publishers, for example, in the US App Store of Apple. So the winner takes it all. That's very clear. If you look at Newzoo's charts published last summer, so you see that out of this millions of apps, 1.5 million on each store, if you rank the first top 1,000, that's a fantastic achievement compared to how many supply is existing there. Then you make on average, if you're ranked between 100 and 1,000, monthly revenue of 14,000 US dollars. Man, I believe it's impossible to run a profitable business on that. If you're working out of your garage, very nice, that might be sufficient. But if you have invested into your game, and if you're believing into supporting your game on a monthly basis with a significant number of people, that's not going to pay your bill at all. And thus, you really want to become one of these top guys, and then we're talking, of course. And however, it's not that easy to become one of these top guys. Actually, 9 of the 10 most lucrative apps ever launched, as you all know, were launched before September 2013, which is 2.5 years ago. And to go in here and really get your foot into the door, man, that's hard, because it's a self-perpetuating success story. The big guys are having the top chart rankings, and thus it's going on. However, also users, they are spending on average only on 1.6 games. So if they already spend on one game out of the top 10, your likeliness that you are the one which is receiving another second person's spending are extremely tiny. So it's very hard to get it. Also, for most developers of games, depending on where you come from, I do not actually know who that guy is, because in my typical target group of people 18, 24 years old, that's only 5% of those people. And if you look at the other age groups, 3/4 are above 35 years old. Typically, you don't know them as you have been selling your PC games at all. So the user acquisition costs also are very high. So you pay about €3 nowadays in Europe to get a mobile user. If you have a 1% conversion into paying users, that guy on average better pays you €300. So your game must be fantastic to make it. So if you balance that out, the promise and the reality, I would say it's a tough bet. And unless you want to play the lottery, stay out of it. Second thing is that Steam thing. So we have now 140 million users, 9 million at the same time on Steam. It's super quickly growing. They got 1 million additional CCUs in substantially less than a year. It's again very easy to go onto the store in theory, and actually it gives you a good positive brand effect because people think you're a great game as you're allowed to be on Steam. Then again, on reality, again, it's many people being out there, and thus highly difficult to be seen. The average revenue as the games are going up, the average sales per game are going down here, and this has started already as early as 2012. The median value people here are selling only 30,000 copies. If you have a free-to-play game, it's about 10 times that, but under the assumption that you can convert about 10% of your users into paying users, you're down with the same number of a good 30,000 paying blokes again. And I make the point that it may be difficult to pay your full thing with that again, because only 4% sell 500,000 copies or more. So the top 300 games. Also, it's only the big guys paying a lot. So in result, you're not competing for 140 million active people, but you're competing for only 1% of it, because they buy about 33% of all copies ever bought on Steam. So it's not that big a paying user group. That's why the biggest guys are getting bigger, we know that. And in reality, I believe it pretty much balances out. Steam is not your solution neither. It's a fantastic distribution platform, which absolute no doubt reigns supreme. It's getting bigger every day, and it's there to stay. Mostly, I mean, many people attack it, but yet. Then on the other hand, it's not your solution, because again, there's so many games out there. It doesn't worsen your situation, I would say, in relative respects to mobile, but it's as difficult or easy to be successful on Steam as it's otherwise on the PC publishing market. So, lastly, VR. I believe it's a shot in the dark, actually, because the promise is a new untapped market. You can of course, have first mover advantages. You expect that this very year it's going to take off. There are nice initial shipments expected with 3 million headsets in this year. So it's continued to expected to grow very well, up to 30 million headsets shipped by 2020. So there are a lot of people, big names, evangelizing that it's a fantastic thing to have. Yet on the other hand, I can't even call it reality to compare it with the promises, because there is no reality yet. It's just, of course, a shot in the dark, but I could see some problems as well. So there's very high buy-in costs. The cost for the hardware for the users will be very significant, like as a full console in itself. Although, of course, if you look at the very old model of what IT does, it's put in, something is being processed and computed, and then there's an output device. It's just a fantastic new output device, but it's not the thing doing the logics. So it costs, however, the same thing as the computing logic thing in the middle. It will require very expensive hardware, and only 10% of the 20% of the install base are able to run it. As long as you don't have fantastic software coming up, people are probably not going to buy themselves new computers to run on with their VR gear. Thus, they won't have a VR gear. We don't know which software is coming up. There's no system seller inside yet, like a Halo selling off the Xbox back then. So just a few demos. Also, what is a great VR game? It's pretty much unknown. Most people haven't been spending a lot of time experimenting with it yet. So it's a big unknown what's to be expected and what people will like. So it's more likely that growth is slow. And in contrast to some other quotes we have seen before, it's actually those people who are making the money on software that are more skeptical than those guys wanting to sell the VR. It very much reminds me of the gold rush in the Wild West back in the years in North America, when, of course, everybody was very happy selling shovels. You could make a fortune out of that. But if you were a poor gold digger, you may have earned out big, or more likely you didn't. And thus rather try to talk to people digging themselves than to those trying to sell shovels to everybody. I believe also that games industry biz said that's the most antisocial way imaginable. There's a lot to it. I mean, we have all enjoyed gaming as a social experience, and in the living room playing with the consoles back then together. That's of course a different thing if you shield yourself off completely. So these guys are skeptical and expect that it's going to wait until it's really becoming big. So another comment on first mover advantages. They are biggest if the thing here, the market develops slowly. That's not the case with VR. It's tremendous which new gears coming up and how they expect to sell off. And the technology development is slow. If it is slow, then the sustainability of first movers is highest, because both of that is very fast with VR. Actually, even if you start now, it's theoretically expected that your first mover advantage won't last very long. So, I leave it to yourself to judge it, but it's well possible that it will be a game changer for us. But uncertainties in the marketplace are, in my personal opinion, too high to justify big investments. And thus, if you have the responsibility for 500 people or so, do you want to have them working on something very experimental as this one, or rather do what you can do best? And my point is, you rather maybe want to have them working on what they do best. And so because there are indeed growth areas much closer, hopefully, to your core business, what I would consider the traditional games business. So, of course, you need to invest in your portfolio. So, as we do at Gameforge MMOs, and we have it here as well, as with the mobile games, 5 out of the most successful MMOs, it's a bit outdated, there's not so much actual new data available, are older than 5 years. We have that in our portfolio. We have been able to grow an O game, which is a web game of ours we put into the marketplace in 2002. We had the best year ever in 2014. An MMO RPG with a client called L-Sword we put out in 2006. It was making money all the time. Otherwise, we have put it off, and it had the best year ever in 2015. So it's possible to grow the staff. So I spare you the more detailed examples why it is actually really paying off to concentrate on what you do there with your existing portfolio. So what a trend I fully believe on if you're doing the PC core gaming activities is, of course, esports. That's fantastically growing, and it's a super way to reach out to your audience. The growth is real. It has been proven already. It's continuing to be there. I'm running very quickly here because we are in the last minute. I want to leave you a few questions still. So it's also, of course, manifested in recent deals with Activision, Blizzard hiring fantastic people to run their esports division, and the European Sports League ESL company Turtle has been acquired last year. So also, I fully believe on free-to-play on console. Why should it ever be that the huge success of free-to-play games on PC could not be replicated on the consoles, although at the moment the supply is rather little. So we have an install base of 55 million playing units already on Generation 8 consoles, and I believe it's a fantastic marketplace, very low supply, and I can very well imagine that the likeliness to spend money by users there who have been paying money always in significant proportions is well existing. So I believe this is the growth areas that are really there, and you can work on them today instead of competing in red races. So let's call it a day with this one. This one's here, some additional measures, but I'm running out of time. I thank you very much for your interest, and am available now for another 4 or 5 minutes for questions in the room, and otherwise I'll hang out there for more after. Thank you very much.
So you mentioned esports as a big trend, but how do game developers can capitalize on that?
Oh, it's the decisive question you're putting here, because it's not just the game you have anyhow that will lend itself easily for esports. You need to have it in mind from the outset that you not only have a spectators mode, which is working fine, but they have an entire gameplay, which is really working to that it's short enough to captivate an audience, and that it is, of course, open enough that in the very last seconds a game can turn around and flip. So you need to have that in mind from the very beginning. And then as you do that, you can easily find interest with the big guys supporting esports. And if you're really good, you don't need to pay them, although it's mostly the same thing always. If you're small and need the attention, they don't want to put you online, otherwise you need to pay them. If you're already big, they're very happy to broadcast you, and you don't need to pay a thing.
Very interesting. Okay, so thank you, Carsten.
Thank you very much. See you around, guys.